It's getting close to Thanksgiving, and I thought it would be a great time to share with you my chiffon pumpkin pie recipe. Now, I was first introduced to this recipe by my husband's grandmother, and she made this every year for Thanksgiving as a tradition. And the first time I tried it, I was sold. I was never going back to regular pumpkin pie again. So what makes this recipe special or different, and given its name chiffon, is that what we're going to do is we're going to cook up our spices and our pumpkin together on the stove, and that's what makes it a no-bake recipe, by the way. And after it cools, we're going to add our egg whites that have been whipped up really firm. And so what that's going to do is that's going to create some volume in the pie filling, as well as make it light and creamy. And so it's a perfect way to end your Thanksgiving meal. That's, you have this big large meal, and then you finish off with this, and it's perfect. And so for this recipe, I'm going to go ahead and use a store-bought pie crust. Now, if you want to use a homemade one, you have your own, you can use that. I have one on my website, and you can check that out. It's in the apple pie recipe that I have. But anyway, for this one, we're going to go ahead and do this real quick. We're just going to use a store-bought one, and I'm going to follow the directions on the package. So right now what I'm doing is I'm just putting my pie crust in a 9-inch pie plate, and I'm just easing the dough in and not stretch it. Okay, so I get it all the way to the bottom, and then I'm going to flute the edges by just using 2 fingers from one hand and one with the other. So I'm just going to go around the edge like this. So this goes pretty quickly, and I've got my oven preheated to 450 degrees, which is what it says on the package. Okay, so now that I've got my edges fluted all the way around, I'm going to put a few of these holes in it with a fork, and what this does is it keeps the pie crust from bubbling up. You'll find sometimes that it'll still bubble up, but it does help. And once it's baked and we put our filling in, it'll be fine. It won't get soggy or go through. So just a few holes like that should do it. I want to add some foil. Now, I've torn off a few strips of foil, such as these, to put around the edges, because what happens a lot of times is the very edge of the pie crust tends to get too done or even burned before the pie crust is done. So what I'm going to do is just wrap this around loosely, just over the edge like this, and it takes 3 strips. This is just regular, like I said, regular foil. And sometimes it's a little hard to keep it where you want it. Basically, that's it. And I'm going to cook it like this for probably 4 or 5 minutes before taking it off. I will take it off at the end. So we're going to stick this in the oven. The instructions say 11 to 13 minutes. I'm going to put it in, and I'm going to check it in about 5. So now let's go over our ingredients. The first thing we're going to need is some Knox gelatin. Now this is going to help firm up our pie filling. And I have a 1/2 cup of water, which I'm going to mix those two together. We've got a 1.5 cups of pumpkin. Now just buy yourself a can of 100% pumpkin. Try not to get the one that has spices already in it. You want the one that's just pumpkin. And I've got 3/4 cup of light brown sugar, firmly packed. I've got 3 eggs that are separated. I've separated the whites out, and I'm going to put those in the refrigerator. And I also have a 1/2 cup of low-fat evaporated milk. I have a 1/2 teaspoon of salt, 6 tablespoons of sugar, a teaspoon of cinnamon, and a teaspoon of ground nutmeg. Now with your ground spices, I do want to mention that you want to use as fresh a product as you can get. So check your labels. A lot of times they'll have the expiration printed on the bottom like this one does. And if it doesn't, you can write it in with a Sharpie. That way you'll always know how old your spices are, because like I said, they only last about 3 years. Okay, so now let's check our pie crust. I think it's ready. What we want it to be, this looks like it's perfect. We've got it nice and golden brown, and it's laying relatively flat, and we're going to let that cool before we can add any ingredients to it. So while we're waiting for our pie crust to cool completely, we're going to start with our recipe. So I'm going to take the Knox gelatin, and I'm going to add it to a 1/2 cup of cold water, and I'm going to stir it up, and we're going to place it in the refrigerator while we're waiting. We'll use it later. We want to stir it up a little bit, and again, this is going to kind of hold our chiffon pumpkin pie and give it some form so it doesn't, so it doesn't get runny. Okay, so I'm going to place this in the fridge. All right, so now we need to put our pumpkin pie part together. So we're going to add everything to our saucepan and put it on the stove. Okay, so first we're going to add the pumpkin to our saucepan. I'm going to add the brown sugar. Now I want to stir this up pretty good, start getting it mixed in. We'll add the eggs. Now I want to get this part blended before I add the rest of those ingredients. So when it looks like it's reasonably blended, I'm going to add the evaporated milk, the salt, and the 2 spices, the cinnamon, the teaspoon of cinnamon, and the teaspoon of nutmeg. And I'm going to stir this up. And once I get it all mixed in, we're going to put it over the heat. All right, so I've got the mixture in the pan here now, and I'm stirring it up and I'm cooking it over medium-high heat. Now this is really important that we cook this for 10 solid minutes. What can happen is if we don't cook this mixture enough, over enough heat, but not too much heat, it won't firm up and your pie will, the end result in your pie will be a runny pie. So it's really almost critical that this part gets cooked well. So I'm going to stir it constantly. Like I said, for 10 minutes I'm going to look for a little bit of a bubble in here, and I'll show you that in a minute once it gets to that point. So you can see now it's starting to bubble up quite a bit, and I want to keep stirring it, and you might even have to turn it down just a little bit if it starts to bubble up and spit on you and burn your hand. But keep stirring. What we want to do is make sure those eggs in this mixture get cooked really well. So I just wanted you to see how, we've got this little bubble going on, and you just keep stirring. Right now I'm at about 7 minutes to go. So this is how this mixture should look at the end of 10 minutes of cooking. You see how it's quite a bit thicker and it's holding its shape. That means those eggs are well cooked, and that's what we want. So I'm going to turn the heat off. The quickest way to cool this off is to fill a bowl with ice, like I've done here. You see all the ice I've got in there? And now I'll just stick the pan right on top, and I'm going to let it sit there until it's basically completely cooled. So as this is cooling, now is the time that we need to add our gelatin Knox. So this I took out of the refrigerator, and I'm going to pour it in. This is going to help firm this up even more. And we're just going to stir it in. And you want to make sure that this is incorporated nicely into the pie filling. So I'm going to give it a good stir. And this is probably going to take about 15 minutes or so to cool. We want it to be completely cool before we add our egg whites. So now we're ready to mix up and whip up our egg whites. I've taken these are 3 egg whites that I separated before, and I'm going to pour them into a large bowl here. And then I'm going to add my 6 tablespoons of sugar and a pinch of salt. And we're going to whip these up until they're nice and firm, and then I'm going to combine the 2. Okay, so let's start with this. So I'm going to whip this up. I know you can't hear me with the mixer going on, but I'm going to whip this up until I get some nice firm peaks. Okay, so here's our egg whites that are really whipped up nice and firm. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the pumpkin mixture to it and fold it together. I'm just going to scoop that in, and you do want to make sure that that pumpkin mixture is completely cooled. Otherwise you'll kind of flatten out your egg whites, and we don't want to do that. We want to keep it nice and fluffy. So once we get all that in there, we're going to fold it in like this until we get it all mixed in. So you go from the center out and just keep twirling it around. Okay. Now we're ready to scoop it into our pie crust. All right, so here's our pie crust. And all we have to do is fill it up. Now that also you want to make sure is completely cooled, and it is. So all we do is pour this in, and you can see the texture of this. And you can kind of spread it around a little bit. And get all of that mixture out of there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to refrigerate this before we serve it so it really gets nice and firm. Now all we have to do is refrigerate our pie for at least an hour, but longer would be better, so a couple hours would be great. All right. So here's our pie. It's been chilling in the refrigerator for a couple hours. I hope you'll give it a try. When you try this, I do want to recommend one thing. Whipping cream is really a necessity for this pie, and I like to use Trader Joe's. They have an organic whipping cream that is really superior to anything else I've really tried. So I recommend you try that one. It just has so much more flavor to it, and it's rich and creamy. Top it, put it on this pie, and serve it up. Try it for Thanksgiving or Christmas. It is really delicious. It's nice and creamy, and it's really, really light, and it just goes great after a big, heavy meal. So thanks for watching. Be sure and subscribe to my channel. That way you can keep up on the latest videos that I'm coming out with. All right, thanks for watching.